Hello, my friend, and welcome to another episode of the Colorful Futures podcast, where we talk about all things between the intersection of intersectionality and careers and business. I'm your host, Leora Alvarez, career coach and HR consultant. And today we are talking about the realities of being self-employed, of having your own business, your own company. This actually came up, I think, last week with a client that I was talking to about business coaching, and just like they were bringing up sort of these different perspectives and realities of being self-employed and how we often kind of romanticize being self-employed, especially like the dude bros out there who are like, oh, just quit your 9-to-5, start a business. But it's not always that simple. And frankly, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. Don't get me wrong. I love having my own company. I love being self-employed. It is the thing that has just solved so many of my struggles when it's come to my workflow and my work and just working with my brain, working with my natural body and mind cycles. But it's hard. And I think especially as a neurodivergent person, it can be really difficult to set and maintain boundaries so that you actually have work-life balance, or as I prefer to call it, work-life integration. Early in my business, we'll say like a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half, I remember having these conversations with my therapist, specifically about how I just felt like I always needed to be working, especially in the beginning of my business when I hadn't quite earned revenue yet, or if I had, it was just a little bit, and I was still like very much early stages, building resources to sell, figuring out my offers, figuring out my services and marketing them. And I just always felt like I needed to be doing something, and that if I wasn't doing something, then I wasn't like taking my business seriously, or I wasn't like working hard enough to meet my goals. And she reminded me that a lot of the thoughts I was having were very much still ingrained in this sort of corporate 40-hour work week, 9-to-5 mentality, but that was the whole thing that I was walking away from. That was the whole thing that I was avoiding and that I didn't want to take part in. And it takes a long time to sort of release that mentality, those expectations of like, well, if it's 9 a.m., that's when you got to start your day. If it's 5 p.m., that's when you end your day. And, you know, we work Monday to Friday and we work 40 hours and like, that's what we have to do. When in reality, if you look at the studies, this is very similar studies on like the 4-day work week, for example. Like people don't actually work 40 hours a week. You know, you are taking breaks, you're taking body bio breaks, you're taking mental breaks, you are chatting with your coworkers, you know, at the water cooler, or you're taking a lunch or whatever. Like you're not actually working 40 hours. And so when I started my business and I felt like I needed to be following this like very specific schedule, it took me a while to realize that I had control over my schedule. And what that meant for me at the time was that I could kind of work when my brain was in that mode. I could rest when my brain wasn't in that mode. I could take my time getting ready in the morning. I remember very specifically, like early biz days, my wife and I would go to a coffee shop. We would take a leisurely walk. We would go get a latte, go get a drink, get a little treat. And I would be back at my desk at like 10:30, 11 o'clock, starting my day and getting ready for calls. And by like 4 o'clock, I'd be back on the couch watching TV, hanging out, chilling. Sometimes I'd work nights and weekends, but it was because I was inspired to do something. So I would start working. And I was probably working maybe like 30 hours a week or less. It was definitely a lot less than what I was working when I was, you know, in a corporate environment. So that was really nice. It was nice to finally feel like I had more autonomy over my schedule. I had more freedom, more flexibility in my schedule. But I also want to sort of add a disclaimer that while I felt a sense of pressure to make my business work, to make sure that I could get revenue from my business, I was laid off in March of 2023, which is what eventually led to me deciding to start a business because it was just a really tough time for recruiters and HR in general to get work. it's important for me to add this disclaimer that my dad had passed like 6 months, 5 months prior. And I had, frankly, the privilege of having some generational wealth passed down to me. It wasn't an obscene amount, but it was enough that I wasn't necessarily concerned about paying the bills, especially at this time in the early stages. I was still on severance from being let go from my prior role. And so I was able to kind of approach my business without that sense of desperation. I've started businesses in the past that didn't go anywhere, that didn't do well, that I really struggled with. And I remember, years back with other businesses, having this sort of desperate feeling of really needing it to work. I didn't have any money to fall back on. Signing a client would mean being able to buy groceries. Getting a second client would mean I could pay rent. It was like money in, money out. There was no wiggle room. I was desperate. The cash flow wasn't there and I didn't have a buffer. So things were a lot different. And I know that I was very privileged in that sense. And I still am. There are still a lot of things that I don't have to stress about because I've got that safety net. So I do like to be transparent about that because I never want anyone to be like, oh, well, you've got it all together and you're stress-free and it doesn't having a business doesn't have to be hard. It is hard. Being in control of your own revenue and your own pay and stuff is hard. However, working for someone else and constantly changing jobs and feeling like you're masking all the time and being burnt out, that's a different kind of hard. I feel like I got a little off on a side quest there. But I was having this conversation with this client last week and we were just talking about sort of these different ups and downs of being a business owner and just the realities of what you go through. And again, I love having my own business. I love being self-employed. I love the opportunities I've been able to create for people and, growing my team and things like that. But there are things that you need to be mindful of so that you reduce the chance that you'll get burnt out as a business owner. And it might still happen, but the best thing we can do is just try to be proactive about the work-life integration. So there were some things that I really struggled with early on in the business. Like I mentioned, kind of releasing that 40-hour work week mentality. I do think that I struggled with setting boundaries. So frankly, this is something I still struggle with, but we'll get to that. Setting boundaries meaning, I would have my work email connected, my personal company email connected to my phone. So even if I was sitting having dinner or out having plans or, visiting my in-laws, visiting my parents, anything like that, I could see my email. And there were times where I actually kind of remember seeing an email as we were pulling into my in-laws' driveway that was just some random person giving me unsolicited feedback that I could tell this person had felt like their nervous system was activated maybe when they saw some of my content and they decided to send me a novel email about just the things I was doing that were wrong and just putting a lot of the blame that things that they were experiencing and just kind of venting to me about it in a way that made it feel like it was my fault. I didn't even respond to it. I just was like, this doesn't feel like it's actually about me. So I'm just going to let it go. But it still stuck with me. And I thought about it for the next hour while I was trying to visit family. So that was really difficult. There were also things that I struggled with early in business, like having tasks that took me way too long because they were tedious and I would take a long time to get it done because I didn't want to do it. It was taking forever. It wasn't within my zone of genius. It wasn't something that I specialize in. Ironically, it was creating content, which is technically something I specialize in because my undergrad degree is in graphic design. I worked as a photography assistant. I've been a photo editor. I've created video content since I was in middle school. So these are things I am certainly qualified to do and can do, but I didn't want to be doing them. I mean, let's be real. There is a reason I left the graphic design field because I don't want to be a designer. So there were just a lot of things that kind of came up and tasks that would become almost like distractions for other things. Like if I was trying to make a carousel to, post a tip or resume advice or something, I would procrastinate doing that by tweaking a spreadsheet or by messing with an automation or by researching something. And I would just end up doing these tasks that weren't progressing my business, that were just really distractions. So I kind of worked my way through that. A few months into my business, I realized that creating content, especially like static carousels or graphic posts and things, were taking me too long, and they were taking me away from my client work. As I was getting more clients, I realized there's fewer hours in the day that I can actually work on my business. As I got more clients, I had less time in my day to do these tedious tasks that I didn't even want to be doing in the first place. And that's when I brought on a virtual assistant, Christina. And I knew that Christina's a good friend of mine, and I knew that she was doing VA work and different things. And I remember I just texted her and I was like, hey, I'm struggling with this. And I kind of laid out the tasks that I was doing that were just taking up so much of my time. And I was like, is this something you do? Is this something you could take on? She said yes. And I was so grateful for that because I was able to delegate some of those tasks. I'm still learning this. I'm still growing this skill as a business owner, as a leader, to delegate strategically. But we'll talk about that a little bit more soon as well. That was like the first time that I was able to actually bring someone else on to do some of this work. And that way I could focus on my clients. I could focus on developing offers, developing programs, being able to pass off this one part of my business that was just a brain suck, a time suck, an energy suck. Posting graphics, posting carousels, keeping up my Instagram marketing was so important, but it took me away from the most important work, which was having good client experiences and expanding my offers. And so being able to delegate that allowed me to develop my group coaching program, because now I had more time to sit down and look at my schedule and see, what are people needing? I had more time to meet with more people one-on-one.